In this short video, we're going to be going over the Learning Narrative Project, which is your first writing assignment for WRA 101. So first, what is the learning narrative? Ultimately, the learning narrative is asking you to tell a story about something that you've learned. Maybe it's something from sports or music or cooking, or it might be a writing or reading, like how did you learn to write? How did you learn to read? It's a story about something you've learned or about a lesson that you've learned, maybe teamwork, perseverance. As the written project description asks, what are the spaces and places where we learn? What do we learn? How do we learn these things? Who can teach us? Like, who do we learn from? And why are these lessons, this learning that happens throughout our life, why are they important in these particular spaces and places and elsewhere? When do we use the learning? How do we use it? Why do we use it? These are the types of things that your learning narrative is exploring. So let's do just a few definitions here. First of all, we have story. This comes from Sean Wilson's book called Research is Ceremony. And he says that we have three types of story. We have those sacred stories. Those are the stories that we kind of only tell in certain places or in certain spaces to certain audiences. They exist here. You might have some stories in your family that don't really leave your family. We have stories with morals or lessons. And then we have those stories about our personal experiences that help guide us and that teach us. So we're probably really focusing on one of these last two types of stories, something with a lesson or something about a time that you learned something that helped guide or teach you in some particular way. Places. Now, place and space both come from Descartes, a French philosopher and rhetorician, and he says that places, in kind of a very simplified definition here, places are these physical spots. And spaces are more where we find our meaning or our purpose within these places. So here's some things to maybe help that just a little bit. You're all attending MSU. So MSU is a big place. There's buildings of classrooms and dorms and cafeterias and maybe where you go to hang out, recreation places, right? So where do you feel like yourself? Where do you really feel like you fit in or you belong? Those, even if they're in a particular place, is your space. So a space might be a place, but it also could just be that group of people. So maybe it's not a particular place that you like to go. Maybe it's not your dorm. Maybe it's not the cafeteria, as long as you're with a certain group of people. And when you're with that group of people, no matter where you are, you feel really comfortable. You feel that you belong. You have purpose and meaning, and that's your space. Another really great book here, Thomas King, The Truth About Stories. Did you ever wonder how it is we imagine the world in the way we do? How it is we imagine ourselves, if not through our stories? So he's suggesting here that our stories are how we look at the world. If you have some time, you might want to watch this great TED Talk later. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, The Danger of a Single Story. The link is here. I'll make sure that this presentation is available for you as well. How do we tell stories? Well, stories have a few things. They have a setting. We have to understand where it's taking place. They usually have some type of a plot. They've got to have some action that kind of builds up to this climax, and then it kind of comes down to that meaning, to that lesson that we're getting. They have some characters. They usually have some type of conflict or theme or lesson that you want the reader to understand. And if you want to learn a little bit more about those, check out this Elements of Story slideshow. It just kind of runs through those things again to remind you what are the pieces of a story. So what do you have to do for this project? Well, let's go into it here. Let's go through all the parts. So first of all, your project, you do have a couple of, I think you have 3 options. You can do something written, you can do something recorded. The the first option, your written option, is a typical story or essay, a narrative, 1,000 to 1,200 words in length, double spaced. If you'd like to record that, and honestly, you probably still have to kind of write it out a little bit so you know what you're saying, it should be approximately a 3 to 5 minute audio recording. If you prefer to kind of play with the format a little bit, you could also do this as a letter. And those options that you have for your project are described more in the written project description. Your project should have a beginning, a middle, with evidence, which is coming from your own experience. It's coming from you. You do not need outside sources. In fact, you should not have outside sources for this project. And then you need an end. Also, please make sure that you have a title other than learning narrative. Give us a title that lets us know what we're going to be reading about. We're going to be going through the same writing process that we'll be using for most of our projects here. We have some pre-writing. Your kind of in-class activities will be a life map and inquiry. And then, of course, you most likely want to choose one choice off from the rubric. For drafting, your first draft is due by 9/14 in Eli Review in order to get some peer review on that from your classmates. This time we will be doing that in class so we can go through that process together. And then you probably want to choose one choice off from the list. And actually, in-class peer review is one of your choices. So it's really easy to get your drafting done just by coming to class. Revising, remember, we're going to talk more about this too, but it'll be global, not local. So we're looking for content, not just kind of those grammatical or punctuation types of changes. And then you'll probably want to have one choice, either a plan for how you're going to revise or some other revision type of activity. And then last is your publish and share. You have to have one of those 3 choices. So you need to have a written or an audio story in some way. And then your recommended due date is that you have that completed and turned in with your reflection on September 18th. The reflection. So it might seem a little bit kind of odd or funny here that you're going to reflect about what you learned by writing a learning narrative, but that's what we're going to do. So reflection really is where we think about, where we consider, where we really kind of ponder, what did we learn through something, what that process that we went through, what's going to stick with us. So just like this learning narrative story, your reflection is a story of what you learned through the process of creating and writing this learning narrative. And it's really answering 4 main questions. 1, what did you try to do? So a summary. 2, how did you do it? So some analysis. How well did you do it? Some evaluation. And remember, it's okay to say, this did not turn out how I wanted it to. Because what did you learn through that process of it not turning out? And then 4, so what are you going to do next time? Some goal setting, some revision. You have options, of course, for how you'd like to present your reflection, and those are all explained more in the written overview. But I do want you to remember that the reflection is 50 points or 50% of this whole project grade. The whole project is only worth 100, and the reflection is 50 points of it. Do not skip this part. Do not skip it. It is due with the final product or the final project that you turn in. And if for some reason you forget or you just don't quite have this piece of it done, you can turn it in later. There is a little bit of a reduction in the full points for that, but still do it because it's 50% of the project. So you really need to do it to do well on the project. How will the project be graded? There is a rubric in the learning narrative overview, the written overview. Here it is as well. Again, setting your learning goals, That's 10 points of the project. Going through that process is up to 40 points. And then writing your reflection is another 50. So the whole project is worth 100 points. Make sure that you are doing all the parts. What questions do you still have? I'm sure that there are lots of things that are kind of going through your head right now and you're thinking, I'm not really sure about this particular piece. So I really encourage you to send me an email to ask in class, but don't just leave it out there. Get your questions out there. Make sure I know what you need to know to be successful in this project. And then the official stuff, we always give our credit. I did not create this, what I think is really pretty slideshow. It did come from Slide Carnival, and here are some of the fonts that they used.